Good evening, social media. Beginning the music started and everybody can be let in the room. Good evening. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club, Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, December 5th. I am your host. Well, not host. I am Sean Hall, your director of programming with the VBC. Glenn is our host. Glenn, how are you doing tonight?
Excellent. Trying to hang in there. I'm going to apologize up front for any sneezes and coughs, but it's the season.
We will roll with it. Absolutely, 'tis the season, but we will get through it. It's great to see you all here tonight. Brad, Doug, I'm seeing some new faces. Sure, maybe it's not Donna actually, but you seem new to me. Welcome. Gary Tipton, welcome. Lisa, Diane. Yeah, lots of new faces. That's wonderful. We are the Veterans Breakfast Club. Our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. We've been doing it for 16 years. We continue to do it Monday nights at 7 p.m. with our normal Scuttlebutt program, as well as our Thursday nights with Glenn for Greatest Generation Live. And you can check out everything there is to know about us on our website, veteransbreakfastclub.org. We invite you to go on there, check us out, check out our upcoming online and in-person events. Love to see you at an in-person breakfast if you live here in the Western PA region. But we also invite you to become a donor of the VBC while you're checking out our blog, all of our past events on there, signing up for our free quarterly magazine. I'll get into all that a little bit later. But we have a great program lined up for you, despite some people that went on the IR last minute for us. So I'm sure it'll work out. Glenn, how's it going?
Yeah, a couple of our guests had to take sick call. We wish them well. We'll miss them. One is Mike Faley, who we've had on a couple of times before. He's one of the 100th Bomb Group Foundation historians. The good news is I spent about an hour on the phone or on a Zoom call with him yesterday late afternoon, and he imparted a huge amount of wisdom, knowledge into my head, of which I might remember some. Mike is so deeply steeped in this thing. These subjects will miss him. And the other is Rebecca Hutchinson, who also not feeling well. She has been also with us through this series of discussions on her father's book, Harry Crosby's book, A Wing and a Prayer. This is now the fourth time we've talked about this, and at least for anything scheduled, maybe the last time for a while. Although every time I read it, I come up with something new. It's such a good book. So yeah, Glenn Flickinger, Greatest Generation Live. I recognize just about all the faces. Thank you so much. I think I saw Ed Cottrell. Did I see Ed at one point there, Sean? There he is, waving hello. Hello, Ed. Heard some more bad weather down your way, or at least something negative going on in the...
Our weather is pretty good right now.
Is that okay? I'll be down tomorrow.
Good.
That's not so good in Pittsburgh.
Well, I'm getting ready to go to Bastogne on Monday.
Oh yeah,
for 10 days. I'm going over for the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh.
I'm going with Andy Biggio, and then I think we are gonna dedicate two monuments, one for the 75th Infantry, and I don't know which the other one is. And then we're going to be in a parade, and then we're going to meet Sunday the 14th. I think we're meeting 300 to 400 people signing books. So it's going to be a busy 10 days.
Well, I wish you well, Ed. You're still
Thank you.
A miracle man to me, that you can do all that travel, and you travel safe. I do have a question in mind for you a little bit later in this program, Ed. So,
okay.
Stay
I'll
sharp
listen for it.
as you always are.
I'll listen for it.
Okay. Let me introduce our sort of guest panel for tonight, if you will. Three of the names are familiar to you. We have Nancy Putman. Nancy, say hello, please.
Hi, all. I see
100th
some
Bomb.
of our members. I see Lisa and some other people.
Thank you for bringing them along, Nancy. And also with the 100th Bomb Group Foundation, Jim Blakely. Jim,
Hi, guys and girls.
thank you. Thank you. Jim, I can't remember, Jim, was it last night I got an email from you and I said, geez, I'm sorry it's too late because I got too many guests already. But Jim mentioned maybe he could get John Bennett's son to be on tonight. And I turned
I
him
thought about that.
I turned him down just because I thought it was too late and I already had 6 guests. And now I only have 4. So you never know, right? And then we have Colin Heath with us. Colin, please say hello.
Hello, all.
Okay, Colin's going to give us a couple of thoughts about the Luftwaffe's perspective on their dealings with the 100th Bomb Group. And then a name that we have not had on before, but we're very pleased to have. I was introduced to her from Nancy, and that's Heather Thies. Heather, please say hello.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here.
Heather, tell us about yourself. You're with the Mighty Eighth Museum, which is pretty interesting.
Yes, I am the Director of Education at the Mighty Eighth Air Force Museum in Savannah, Georgia. And I've been there almost 18 years now. So
yeah,
it's been great.
Must be a fascinating job. I've been there 3 or 4 times, but I don't see you out on the floor. So you must be one of those smart guys in the offices researching and studying.
Or you just saw the giant group of kids that I was with and went, wait, and headed the other direction, because otherwise that's what I'm doing.
Could have been that too. Could have been that too. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. And Heather helped out tremendously a couple of weeks ago. We'll get into this a little bit later with volunteering 3 different letters that she found in their archives that were letters from the 1990s, the early 90s, and they were exchanges between Frank Murphy, one of the original cadre of the 100th Bomb Group, navigator, author of a book, Harry Crosby, of course, and then also a letter, I think it was from Frank to Roger Freeman.
Glenn,
All dealing with these topics. Yes.
I hate to interrupt. I just want to let you know John Luckadoo just popped in the room.
Oh, my goodness. Hi, John. Let's
Hey, Lucky.
yeah, John, please say hello.
Hi, Glenn.
Hey, John. There you
Glad
are.
to be with you. I'm sorry I'm a little late, but glad I could join you.
Hey,
Well,
Lucky.
Yeah.
Hi, Nancy.
Lucky.
Hi, Heather. Where's Mike?
He is sick.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yes, so you will get original source commentary on our group commanders.
I was lamenting not having Mike.
I'll be happy to add whatever I can as one who was there.
Okay. Well, we're really pleased to have you and honored to have you again, Lucky. So, yeah, please, as we go through this, please jump in, and I'm sure we'll be asking you some questions along the way since you were there. Well, we've done is read about it all and heard about it all. So thank you so much for coming on the program. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Glenn.
So let's get started. I don't have a long PowerPoint presentation tonight like I often do. I have some photos of the various commanders that we're going to put up. This all started with, reading Harry's book. Now, I don't know how many times I've read it, half a dozen, 10 times. And we've done various programs. The last program was on his development as a navigator. The program before that was on the Bremen mission. And then the program for that was sort of the original program with, just about the book in general. But as I read the book, I kept reading about the comments he made about the various bomber group commanders. And it just I kept going back to it, trying to understand what he was trying to convey. Okay. And this process has really helped me, this research and Heather's letters and the talk I had with Mike Faley yesterday has helped me. And I'm going to read, I think here, if I can find it, a couple of the, well, I won't read it exactly, but I'll just repeat it for you. This comes from a letter that Harry wrote to Frank Murphy. Let me find it actually, so I make sure I get it correct. In the early 90s. In the early 90s, apparently Frank and Harry had quite a correspondence. And Heather was able to dig up a few of these in their, what is it, the Roger Freeman archive
Yes.
that you have. And clearly they were struggling with two questions that they went back and forth on. And I'll just repeat the question in general. One was the Wheels Down Vendetta story accurate, or was it legend or myth? And the second was, so it's a rather specific question. The second question is, why in the early days, the 43 and 44 days, was the 100th Bomb Group casualties, their plane loss rate, so high? You know, what was the reasons behind all that? And you could see that the two men back and forth struggled with it a lot. And I imagine we're still going to struggle with this. And after all, they were men that were there, and different experiences, because Frank, of course, was shot down, became a POW in the Münster raid in October of 43. So he didn't see the subsequent commanders, whereas Harry is, you know, such a fascinating man because he's so intelligent and articulate, but he also saw the whole spectrum of the commanders, right? So in speaking with Mike yesterday, originally I was, you know, there were 10 commanders of the 100th Bomb Group. That's counting John Bennett as one, even though he served 2 short terms as acting commander, okay? And let me put the couple of pictures I have up on the screen now. I think, Sean, you might need to give me, do I have the ability to share? Yeah, I do. Okay.
There you go.
So I wasn't going to mention these two men up front because as I read it, I didn't think they, you know, you only have so much time in these programs. But Mike was prepared to talk a lot about these men. So I'm going to try to give you just a tiny bit of what Mike had to say, and then ask our guests, especially Lucky, to give us any input. He said one of the problems they had was that the first commander, and I hate to speak ill of anybody, was not the best leader that could be found for the original training of a bomb group. This Colonel Dar Alkari had his issues.
Alkire.
Alkiri is it?
Alkire.
Alkire. Now, did you
Alkire.
did you were you there at any time during his tenure, Lucky?
I was. He was there when I first came to the group, along with 40 of my classmates.
Okay. And Mike seemed to say that, you know, he was one of the reasons the group had a difficulty in coming together, getting its training correct, and was delayed in going overseas. Would you agree with that, Lucky, with Mike's characterization of him?
I would agree with it because Alkire was a character, and he was rather charismatic. He had a hold over the group for those reasons, not because of his leadership and not because of his airmanship. And that certainly bore fruit when he was finally fired for lack of discipline, air discipline in the group, and replaced.
Yeah.
But as far as the two individuals that you're quoting, their opinion and whether they struggled with trying to ascertain the capabilities of the group leadership. I would just offer this comment, Glenn. In the military, we're not permitted to argue with our leaders as to their orders. Ours is simply to follow orders. That's the only way the military can function. And whether we agree with the orders or not, we're duty bound to carry them out.
Right.
And that is a struggle for many of us who are so independently minded to accept.
Yes, understood. I mean, the commander is the commander, and you march to his orders, no doubt about it. He's replaced by what Mike characterized as a disciplinarian, Colonel Howard Turner, who tried to then, bring more discipline, more order to the group. And he's the man that originally takes them overseas and gets you to England. But as you can see from the dates here, he's there only a few months. And he leaves. And then he's replaced by this next man, who we saw in the Masters of the Air miniseries portrayed, Colonel Howard Hughlin, who takes the group into its initial combat missions. And Mike characterized him as a highly intelligent, highly capable man that was good for the group. But again, he was there, as you can see, only a few weeks, actually, right? And then that comes to the arrival of Chick Harding. But the point that Mike was making to me was, and I hate these analogies, Lucky. I hope I'm not going to offend you with this analogy, but it's the only one I know because I was never in the military and I certainly was never in combat. But it's a little bit like a sports team who keeps changing the coaches every 3 or 4 months. How can the coach have an impact on that team when he's not there long enough to have much of an impact? So the point Mike was making to me was that the group got started on the wrong foot because of the way that turned out, and none of it was meant to be that way. It just happened from the higher ups. So let me stop there and ask the panel in general if they have any comments on those points that Mike made to me yesterday.
Just a comment. Chick Harding played football for Army, and I think he also coached.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
And I do love his portrayal in the TV series.
Yeah. And I'm going to get into Chick Harding next, since he really was the man who took the group. Well, he arrives, has already been a few missions, but he's there the longest and had the biggest impact in many ways because of the early history of it all. Anybody else on those first 3 commanders?
No,
Yeah.
I agree with your assessment and Mike's. Just will make the point for those who are new to this and might not be as familiar as the rest of us that the 8th Air Force was very new to flying missions. They'd only been doing it for a matter of months, and only a few groups were over there. It was really as portrayed in Masters, but they were all going through a transition time of what are we doing? How do we do it? And there were definitely leadership gaps at many places, and it was a learn by doing situation. So I would concur.
And Hughlin is the fella who got acute cholecystitis and had to go to the hospital, and that's maybe why he was no longer a commanding officer. And subsequently, I think he went to the 13th Combat Wing.
Yeah, he went up to headquarters.
Yeah. Mike's thought was that he was all along going to be a short-term commander until they could get
Yes.
Harding played. and he was headed for higher places,
Right.
as was Turner headed for higher places, right? These were all veteran West Point Army officers that
They were
were
the regular guys. Yep.
the regular Army, as is Chick Harding. So you bring up a good point, Nancy. And in one of the letters that Heather shared with us, Frank Murphy's letter to Harry in 1993, let me read this one quote, okay, that I think is the basis for a lot about what we can discuss here. This is Frank Murphy writing in 1993. Frank Murphy, the author of
Luck of the Draw.
Luck of the Draw. We were really quite young, fresh from recently established training schools for the most part, hastily assembled into groups and committed to combat without more than youth, naivete, and courage to see us through. There was no body of tradition, knowledge, or experience to guide us. And he goes on a little bit, and then the next sentence is, under the circumstances, it is not surprising that we performed so poorly at times. The amazing thing is that we did it as well as we did. And I just thought that emphasized some of the things Lucky has told us. Heather, any comment on that, since you...
Honestly, that's it. Every time I read anything about all of this, because it was so untested, they were completely figuring it out as they went, that it is amazing anybody made it through anything at all, because it was so untested. This was just them trying, okay, let's try it and see how it goes. So against an incredibly experienced Air Force, the German Air Force. So yes, it is. I mean, he put it perfectly. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you're precisely correct, Heather. I would suggest to you that in context and in retrospect, it is now so apparent to those of us who were there and endured it that we were guinea pigs. We were trying a totally unproven strategy to go out in broad daylight at high altitude and unpressurized airplanes in mass formation with little or no training and experience. Now, as far as the 100th Bomb Group is concerned, it was hampered from the get-go because, number one, they had replaced all the co-pilots, and that severely weakened the camaraderie among the crews and the teamship that they had developed over the course of their pre-combat training, which we as co-pilots didn't have any part of. And so we were being thrown into battle, totally unproven strategy from higher ups that said, don't question why, just go do or die.
And unfortunately, a lot of it was dying.
Had to do.
Yeah.
And for anybody to have survived that is nothing short of miraculous.
I see Doug Dorr with his hand up. Doug, I think you're unmuted.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mr. Luckadoo, who made that decision? When I read that in your book, that's the first time I heard anything like that happening. Who made that call?
I wish the hell I knew.
Nobody can figure
No one has ever acknowledged where the order came from, who initiated it, or why it was done, and it was only done in the
100th
Bomb Group and no other in the entire 8th Air Force. And to this day, we do not know.
We can't find any paper trail
came from or why.
Right.
And whether it was an experiment or was it was an attempt to release co-pilots that had been through training and check them out and put them in different crews or not, God only knows. But it was the most asinine thing that anybody could ever have conceived. And I had to be a part of it. So I'm embittered. Believe me, I'm very much embittered that I was one of the guinea pigs And to prove it, only 4 of those of us 40 that were sent there completed a tour. But it definitely weakened the 100th Bomb Group. And so we were going into combat with not only one hand tied behind us, but both hands tied behind us.
So if I could pick up from there, Lucky, for I'm sorry, did I step on you, Heather? Were you going to?
No.
No. No, I was
Jim?
just going to say, I was going to go back to your sports analogy, Glenn.
Yeah.
That the team, they didn't appreciate, because there was no history with bombing crews,
Yeah.
that teamwork mattered. They treated Lucky and his fellow pilots as interchangeable parts without recognizing the teamwork that had been developed and that was required.
Jim, had your hand up?
Another factor was Russia's Stalin, because he was pushing the Americans into getting into the war as soon as possible. And a third factor was the upcoming D-Day. They wanted to get rid of the Luftwaffe prior to invading Normandy.
Well, when I present on this at libraries and so forth, I make a big point about Operation Torch in November of 1942, because when the 8th Air Force was sent over in early 42, there was no Operation Torch plan. They had certain levels of planes, number of bomber groups that were going to be in the 8th, and that was reduced drastically because of the commitment to North Africa and the Mediterranean.
Right.
That had a big impact.
Huge impact. I mean, it cut the 8th, anything that they built up very, very briefly in those couple of months before. Because I mean, their first all-American, basically everything mission is on August 17th of 42. They get those first, other bomb groups over there as well, besides the 97th, which is the bomb group that flies that first mission. And then they move them to North Africa. They move all these others. They take half the bomb group out, move them. Yeah. So, I mean, they just keep doing that. Oh, we'll take more of the 8th, and now we'll move them to Italy, and now we'll make the 9th. And so they keep hampering just as they're getting built up and stronger and more experience. And then just cut it in half, basically. And all right, start over again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I always felt bad for Ira Aker, because, the LeMay never stopped pounding on him to get it done. But at the same time, he's got a fraction of the resources that he thought he was going to have. So,
right.
So let's go to Chick Harding if we can. And I want to be very careful about this. So Chick Harding's background, he's regular Army, West Pointer. He's kind of almost a legend already at a fairly early age in the U.S. Army Air Force. He flew some of those long missions before the war. Football player at West Point, and I think a football coach. So it's a man sort of, walking on water when he shows up. Okay. But as Lucky put it, man, what he inherits a mess. Another analogy I would use this time about football is I have a younger brother who for a couple of decades was a turnaround expert with corporations. They'd send him into companies or subsidiaries of companies that had failed, that were near bankruptcy or in bankruptcy. He'd be asked to go in and turn it around. And he used to tell me stories about how the leadership team he would meet with, half of them in the first meeting, they were crying, and there was no leadership team. It was very divisive. It was them blaming each other and so forth. So I'm not sure that's a good analogy, but it's the only one I can come up with. It's not a sports analogy, and say, look at Chick Harding. He shows up and man, what a mess he's got on his hands. How would you describe the leadership style of Chick Harding? Lucky or any of our guests, would you like to volunteer a thought on his leadership style?
Well, he was very laid back. He was not aggressive. He was a World War I retread, as we called it. The 8th Air Force was being run by these older black bomber mafia people who had devised this daylight bombing strategy and were going to prove it regardless of what came or who objected to it, because the British were certainly adamantly opposed. And it was unproven, and it was really more than the aircraft or the airmen were prepared in any sense to endure. But that's what we had to face. And of course, as Heather said, going against the most formidable air force in the world, the Luftwaffe, we were playing in their backyard, and we were certainly being hard pressed to walk into the maelstrom that they could deliver, because they were so darned experienced, having been battle tested for 4 years before we got there.
Yeah, and they were defending their land in most, and when you got into Germany, they were defending what they viewed as their property and their land. So
So
Well,
this
they
may-
were defending their homeland, and their backs were to the wall. And of course, they'd occupied all of Europe and were about to jump over the channel into England when we got there. And we were the lifesaver of England to prevent that from happening, because we could outproduce the world. And we had an avalanche of bomber forces, expendable bomber forces, to enter the war. And that's what we did, and that's why we prevailed.
So again, with Mike yesterday, he's a huge admirer of Chick Harding, as am I. I mean, he's the bravest of the brave, and he carried on when he was sick, when he really shouldn't have carried on because with the illness that he had. How would you characterize his view towards discipline, Lucky or Nancy or Jim? Jim, anything from your father's viewpoint that you can remember?
No, he didn't talk about him. Didn't talk about any of the leaders really, except for Bennett.
Well, there's a quote in Harry's book from your father talking about talking about Bennett,
Bennett.
and it infers something about Chick Harding, which I'd like to get everybody's response to. The quote is, when he finds out that Bennett is there, Bennett had been squadron commander. He moves up to acting group commander. And the quote from your father is something like, I'll paraphrase, "I'm glad he's here, because up to now I've had to be the SOB of the group."
Yeah, the disciplinarian, yes.
Yes.
Yes, Bennett was quite a disciplinarian, and it wasn't his goal to be liked by his men. I think Harding had more of a sense of camaraderie with the other men, and that I think that comes across in the series too. And so, yeah, he would go around disciplining his squadron. You know, he was squadron commander at the time.
John Bennett we're talking about.
Yeah, before Bennett came, and the entire transition, Bennett and Harding.
Okay.
So apparently, Harding didn't discipline as much as Bennett did. So there was a change there, and Dad was not very big on corporal punishment, or he was not huge on discipline. I mean, he should have disciplined me more. You know, and he had to keep his men in line, and I think he found that easier after Bennett came. And this came out particularly when Bennett was putting his book. This is Bennett's book before the group, and Everett said, "Yeah, it was really good that Bennett came, because it took the pressure off of him to discipline."
Yeah, my perspective is that, from what I understand of your father, of Everett Blakely, is that he was viewed as the best disciplined airplane commander and lead pilot, and that he was always, you know, in Harry Crosby's telling, is that he he really believed in training, in discipline, and making sure everybody knew their jobs. And I think the outcome of Bremen is an example and proves that.
Very much.
Yes, and Bennett comes in late October, and he goes into the squadron commander's position of the 349th at the same time my father comes in. And Chick Harding is the group commander. So halfway through his stint as group commander, you have a super disciplinarian coming into one of the 4 squadrons. And that was always my viewpoint of it when I would read about it. And like you, Jim, I just reread John Bennett's book because I have it. And obviously I have Crosby's book and reviewed those sections. But I think it was the contrast. And I know in the 349th from day one, when he came in, discipline was everything on the ground and in the air.
Yeah.
There's a question from Brad, I think, related to this. How was discipline instilled and emphasized in the air units, both on the ground and in the air?
Well, I can speak to Bennett because I know what he wrote and I know what my father said. There are 2 things that I would, and there's many anecdotes for the crews on the ground. Not everybody agreed with this. They thought this was unnecessary. He would literally do spot inspections of barracks, especially the enlisted guys. And he would insist on you couldn't be sloppy in your behavior, in how you cared for your uniforms, what you looked like, how you behaved. And I'm not sure it would be quite the same as when you were in training, but it was very strict. He would just march in and he took one of my father's enlisted guys and broke him to private, and just walking into the barracks and wasn't happy with what he found. And my father had to go and rectify the situation, which didn't happen overnight. And then in the air, I think that's more important. And Lucky, might have some insights on this. Bennett was famous for getting in a fighter and going up and watching training and formation flying over England. He did it throughout his time there as a squadron commander and then as the acting group commander.
And embarrassing, senior commanders in his comments to them, because he was
merciless.
so yes.
Yeah, he was famous for that. And I have no idea what Harding did along those lines, and perhaps others do.
Well, he didn't do anything like Bennett did. Bennett was a spit and polish officer, and he insisted on that whenever he was in command, and he was respected, but he was not highly regarded. Chick Harding was more of a humanitarian. He would listen, and he was more of a team player than Bennett. But I guess Bennett did come in at an important time when he could stabilize morale and activities, but he was not the air leader that Harding was. He didn't fly as well, or he didn't lead as many missions, and he didn't stand out as a pilot. He did as a commander.
Well, he flew the March 8th mission, among others. He flew the Rjukan, the heavy water mission to Rjukan, Norway on November 16th, 43. And those were 2 critical missions in the group. and did a great job in both. No losses.
The best story about Bennett's discipline is the one that Crosby tells. And
Yeah.
Crosby or Bennett over the intercom system, so the whole base could hear
The tannoy.
Tannoy, right. A lot of people can't relate to tannoy, but they can to intercom. But so he yells over the tannoy for Harry Crosby to come immediately to his office. So Harry rushes and gets there, and he had a glass door. Bennett had a glass door to his office, so all the people in the headquarters could see what was going on in the office. And he acts like he's dressing down Harry Crosby, when in fact he's having a congenial conversation with him. You know, how's your wife? How's her pregnancy doing? But it looks to the people from the outside as if he's disciplining him. And people felt that if they disciplined Harry Crosby, who was a straight arrow, didn't make mistakes, that he's really a strict commander. So that got around the group, and people felt that Bennett was unnecessarily strict at times, but in fact he wasn't. He was a very kind guy. So that was a great story in Harry's book.
And I think Bennett's philosophy was, and you're exactly right, that they needed the discipline to save the lives, and to cut their losses and to fulfill their missions.
There's a quote here from one of these letters that Heather so kindly shared with us. This is in a letter. I'm sorry, not one of the letters. I'm sorry. This is in the article, Nancy, that you shared with us from Splasher 6. And it's Harry's obituary, Harry's memorial to John Bennett. And
correct.
We're going to put that in the chat if we could, Sean, if people would like to read the whole thing. It's very, very good. Originally written in 1993 when John Bennett passed away, and then republished again in Splasher 6 not too long ago, I think, Nancy.
Yeah,
But,
when did I do it? Yeah, I think about 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago.
But as I read this one passage, it really, really appealed to me, and Heather and I talked about it. So this is from that obituary, if you will. He's talking about John, of course. As a leader, John was the bridge between the early days, he knew many of the originals, and the later days, between the day between the white scarf and the radar screen.
Yeah.
Heather and I went over that a couple of times. Heather, what do you think about that quote and what it means in the development and the evolution of the 100th Bomb Group?
Well, I mean, because everybody still wanted their white scarf, but it's so World War I too. I mean, it just shows the evolution of, you have to wipe off your goggles because you can't see with a white scarf. And so you know where you cleaned it. That's why it's white. To, now you get this technology, and it really, it's so important to have somebody with that discipline to get you from point A to point B, because, at one point in one of these letters, Frank does mention that, Chick Harding is kept around for quite a while. He really is a, guy's guy, the team's coach, so to speak. He's great camaraderie, that sort of thing. But even LeMay liked him so much, and LeMay didn't like anybody. That's why he kept him around. He's like, I should have gotten rid of him sooner, but I couldn't, because he was such a great man and everybody just loved him so much that he couldn't get rid of him. And then Frank says, but you know what? Even if LeMay himself had been on those missions, he would have been just shot down too, because they were that bad, especially like in reference to Black Week, and specifically because that's when Frank is shot down. That's what he's referring to. But in some ways, yes, I mean, that's great, but you also need to, in the 100th, this is why we all, love learning about him and reading about him. There were so many great personalities and characters that you do also at the time need somebody to flow all that personality in the correct direction. And that's what Bennett seemed to be very good at doing.
Yeah. Plus, there are different.
Is that more?
As Frank Murphy pointed out more extensively than that one quote I gave, it's sort of like, look, that the 100th Bomb Group, the 8th Air Force of 42 and early 43, mid 43, was completely different. It was primitive compared to the 8th Air Force and the 100th Bomb Group of D-Day and afterwards.
I mean, you really can't. Yeah, the 8th Air Force is completely so different between the 8th of 42 and 43 and the 8th of 44 and 45 are in many ways just almost completely, I mean, they're completely different, and you can't really compare them because of just the situation of what's happening to them, figuring out what they're doing. By 44, they start to figure it out. They start to have enough things, enough pilots, enough planes, enough of everything. So it is, and then you also get, of course, a new commander that, General Jimmy Doolittle, who changes everything up in a totally different way as well. But I mean, it's so hard. It's like compared apples to oranges.
It's like comparing baseball statistics from the 2030s to the statistics of today. They're really
yes.
I wanted to make one other comment. I am very grateful to John Bennett and to Frank Murphy. And the reason being that John Bennett had a lot to do with the restoration of the museum at Thorpe Abbotts, which you all visited.
Yeah.
And Frank Murphy had a lot to do with the 8th Air Force Museum formation, and he was behind that. So, and I've enjoyed both of those locations, as have many of you, and I'm grateful that they did that.
Yes. I'd like to get his book. Afterwards, I'm going to check with you guys as to how I can procure that book.
Well, Luck of the Draw?
No, John Bennett's book.
Oh, yeah, it's hard to get, but reach out to me. I'll see what I can do for you. It's out of print.
I can get him a copy.
You have an extra?
Excuse me.
Yes.
Let me turn to a slightly different topic.
Sorry, may I interrupt real quick? Brad had a question in the chat. With the evolution of the air war and tactics, how did leaders communicate and lead change while keeping morale high?
Well, any of our guests like to take a shot at that?
I can tell you what Jimmy Stewart told me when I interviewed him.
It's just going to...
Okay, Colin, I was going to bring you into the conversation next anyway. Thank you.
Well, Jimmy Stewart said that they started doing live shows, big band shows, dances, integrating with the locals, especially in his B-24 group, because casualties are so high. In order to get morale up and keep it up, they would bring in celebrities and they would bring in the girls from the local villages, chaperoned, of course. And, well, on occasion anyway, according to what he said. But he said that taking their mind off of the war and off the mission when they weren't flying was critical to giving them mental rest.
And of course, there were the rest homes that...
I was just going to say, my current issue of Splasher 6, which we'll mail in a week or so, has a series on the flak houses for just that purpose.
Yeah. So I was going to bring Colin into this in this respect. And again, it's something that Frank and Harry discuss a lot in their letters to each other. And Harry, in the old Splasher 6 that Nancy shared with me from the 90s and the 80s, he mentions a couple of times. And that's, kind of the question is, I'll put it generally, did the Luftwaffe specifically target the 100th Bomb Group? There's the famous Wheels Down revenge story. Was it true?
No.
No.
It was that's total fantasy on someone's part. I have no idea where that came from.
But it's sometimes a good story to tell.
It's a good story to tell, it's not true.
It's great cocktail conversation, but it's a damn lie.
Exactly.
I wish Mike were here. I wish Mike were here because I came to that same conclusion, Lucky, from the reading I've done and listening to all of you. And I said, Mike, what do you think? And Mike kind of hedged a bit. He goes, in 1999, I was at a reunion, an 8th Air Force reunion where Harry was there. And Harry and I've forgotten, boy, I wish I didn't take note of it because I thought Mike would be on tonight. But Harry and another crewman from another bomb group got into this heated discussion about the wheels down theory. And this other fellow from the other bomb group says that he saw it. He saw the wheels down and, what supposedly happened. And Mike, listened to the two of them and kind of stayed away because it was rather hot exchange. And there's apparently people that still really believe that story.
Oh,
And people still see Elvis also.
but it has been disproven by both the Germans and the British, as well as the Americans, that particularly the crew that it was attributed to, Knox's crew, was not even anywhere near where that was supposedly taking place. And the Germans, who have been interviewed since World War II about whether or not the 100th was marked as a consequence of that so-called incident, they said they couldn't tell one group from the other.
Yep, exactly.
Correct.
And they were not zeroing in on the 100th because of that or any other reason. They were just trying to knock down bombers, and they didn't give a darn which group it came from.
And the 100th was not the top loss group. There's that perception because of several missions where they had massive losses, where they lost 40 to 50% of their planes. But overall, I think we were third in losses overall.
And
That's
losses. But when we lost big.
Yeah, but exactly, that's it. When we lost, we lost big.
Yeah. Colin, any input from your Luftwaffe sources as to their thoughts on the 100?
Well, very few of my German pilots knew which bomb group they were attacking.
Exactly.
Only after they shot a B-17 or a B-24 down and they interrogated the crews did they even know where they were from. They didn't know, and they didn't care. Like Lucky said, Lucky had it. He said they didn't care about which group it was, just knock the bombers down. And one of my late friends who shot down 36 4-engine bombers, Georg Ader, I asked him, I said, what were you thinking about when you saw all those bombers? And he said, wishing I was an American.
Well, actually, the Luftwaffe got double credit for knocking a bomber down because that took 10 men out of the war instead of one when they knocked a fighter down.
I didn't understand. Double credit is the sense towards their medals and so forth.
Well, that's what Gallen said that they did, and he was one of those that disputed the fact that any group could be marked as being a specific target because he said they didn't have the opportunity or the will really to discern between the groups. Some of them had tail markings. They didn't all even have tail markings. So they couldn't tell one group from the other. And it was not unusual for just part of one group to be severely attacked and another part of the same group to be home free. And it would be a milk run for them. And that was how much they concentrated on just one segment of the formation and tried to inflict the heaviest damage on that they could, but they weren't trying to take on the whole formation.
Right. And I think if you look at 2nd Schweinfurt and March 6th in particular, those are really good examples of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
So-
like he said, is right though, because Gallen didn't introduce he got permission from Goering to introduce a new medal award system because flying on the Western Front against top line British, American, and free nation pilots in the bomber formations was a hell of a lot more difficult than flying against the Soviets, even though the air war in the East was much bigger in numbers, but it was far more difficult. And very few German pilots shot down 3 or 4 bombers. If you were good enough at shooting down bombers, they want to make sure you're recognized to the German people as propaganda. So hit it. If you were good at shooting down bombers, you're either very good or very lucky.
Yeah, yeah. Well, who were the German aces in terms of shooting down heavy bombers?
Oh, there were about 100 German pilots that were pretty good at shooting down bombers. Georg Gator was the best at 36 bombers. He had a total of, I think he had a total of 62 claims, but damaged at least, but 36 confirmed kills that he shot down. One of the guys I interviewed, and I knew Georg Gator very well. One of the guys that I interviewed was a wingman to a guy named Heinz Ehlers. Ehlers is the guy, and I got the notes right here from that information. Ehlers was flying 190s on the 10 October raid Münster. And he actually he was shot up 3 B-17s, came around to hit another one, and this was from the 351st Bombardment Squadron.
That's the
And
100th.
and he came in to hit a bomber, but he got caught in a crossfire of defensive fire from bombers, shot his rotor cables out, shot his throttle control out. He had no control. So he collided head on with the Maria Helena. He was ejected from the cockpit, but the whole crew was lost. And he was unwounded, believe it or not. He got bombed, he got blasted out of the cockpit on impact. So he comes down in a parachute and he sees that bomber he collided with just fluttering down and no parachutes. And he went to the local church next door and said, got the priest, he was a Catholic regent, said, "Hey, do me a favor, come with me. We got to find these guys." And they made sure they got, buried in last rites. But 5 or 6 of the pilots on that mission all said that the most dangerous thing in the world, besides stepping into a bathtub with high voltage, was flying against a B-17 formation.
Wow, that's quite a quote. Yeah, yeah. Listen, it's Sean, are you still with us?
Yeah.
There you are, Sean. Yeah, it's almost 8 o'clock. Before we take questions from the audience, let's take our station break and we'll come back and take questions from the audience.
Absolutely. Real quick station break here just to thank our sponsors. We're going to thank Tobacco Free Adagio Health. They're dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about tobacco hazards, and advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. Check them out at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. We'd also like to thank UPMC for Life. They can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC for Life has plans designed for veterans, by veterans, that can save you money and get you more benefits. And you can view all your plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. We have to thank both of them, UPMC for Life and Tobacco Free Adagio Health, for sponsoring the VBC and our programming. We have our current magazine. The next one is being finalized. Hasn't gone to the printer quite yet, but this is the current magazine. We are, I believe, sold out of this one. I say sold out, but this is a free magazine, meaning we've given every one of them out, and we order 10 to 12,000 of these. So if you didn't get one because we don't have your address, please send that to us at Sean, SHAUN, at veteransbreakfastclub.org. We'll be happy to get you a free quarterly magazine of the VBC. There's a lot of the stories that we hear Thursday nights, Monday nights, stories that excerpts from books people send us. It's a great magazine. And again, it is free. We have a survey that we put into the chat. Love for you to take it if you have about 2 to 3 minutes after the program, just to give us your thoughts. And we have some upcoming programs. This will be John Quintrell. He is going to be joining us on Monday night. I'll be hosting that program. He wrote My 365 Days with the Wolfhounds in Vietnam. This is one of those books, Glenn, you mentioned a couple weeks back, a gentleman that wrote a book. You were like, it was tough to get through this. Every once in a while I have to put it down. This one is similar. I don't think I've read a book where somebody has gone through, as the military guys say, the suck, quite maybe as bad as John has. He has a podcast now reviewing his book. He also does a dramatic reading with actors of the book. He's releasing a podcast like that. We're interested in diving into his story from his time in Vietnam. We have an in-person breakfast in Swickley next Wednesday, one of our final 2 of the year. And then we'll be back next Thursday night with the B-26 Marauder and World War II. So great programs coming up. Stay with us through the end of the year. We'll take a little break around Christmas, New Year's, but the programs will continue into the new year. Absolutely.
So just a little bit about these B-26 Marauders. Somebody, one of the other guests we've had over the years, Steve Snyder, introduced me to the B-26 Marauder Association, if you will, and I've been talking to them a lot, hearing a lot of their stories. And you know, it's a totally, I don't want to say totally, but it's a very not a very well told story of the role that the B-26 has played. The emphasis is on the heavy bombers, the 8th Air Force, et cetera, for lots of good reasons. But these men in the B-26s also played an incredible role. And we're hoping to have, and I won't know for a few more days, a 101-year-old B-26 Marauder crew member veteran, Ellis Willie Williamson, on the program next Thursday. But I won't know for a couple more days until I talk to his daughter. But it really been fascinating opening my eyes to the role that these men in the B-26s play. Very different than the heavy Air Force forces. Much more like Ed Cottrell, although Ed was in a P-47, but the B-26s were mostly in the tactical air forces, flying tactical missions. So, okay, before we go further, I've got a question, but I want to give the audience a chance to jump in with anything they might have of our guest panel tonight.
Bob Von Bargen, you put something in the chat here. I'll ask you to unmute. I want to know if you want to ask that specifically. I don't know, Bob, if you can hear us. I'll ask you to unmute. You had mentioned something about the Luftwaffe, what they believe. Hold on one sec. We'll see if we can get Bob unmuted. Oh, sorry, Bob. I'll send it one more time. I think we're double clicking you.
Oh, sorry.
I think it came up in regards to whether or not the Luftwaffe believed.
Yeah, my question when you were talking earlier, it was what everybody else was thinking, and then Lucky answered the question. What we thought is interesting, but what the Luftwaffe thought was essential.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So if there's not another question,
I've got one.
Oh, okay.
This is for Colin. You mentioned that the fighter pilots, the German fighter pilots, were afraid of the B-17s. In fact, they called them Boeings. But did that change in their opinion from the beginning of the war, when fighter support for the B-17s was poor, to the end of the war when it was excellent?
No.
They didn't comment on that?
They commented, but they weren't. The fighter escort made life more miserable for them, of course, especially after the P-51D came out in January 44, and Doolittle then unleashed the fighter forces as an advanced screen to just go out and stir things up long before the bombers got there. But no, the reason they hated the B-17s, not so much the B-24s, because the B-17 was so damn hard to shoot down because of the way the wing configuration was different from a B-24. The high wing on a B-24, every German pilot knew if you could hit the wing root either side, it was a kill. It didn't matter what you hit. But on the B-17, it didn't matter. I mean, there were B-17s that 3 of my German pilots saw their wingmen crash head on into the nose of a B-17 that kept flying. And the defensive fire alone, especially when LeMay developed the box formation, it was just a cone of fire they didn't want to be involved in.
Yeah.
Great plane.
Okay, so I want to go back to the Wheels Down legend and the stories that sort of came about that you hear so much about that I think also are probably legend, but get Lucky and Heather and others' opinion, because there's lots of these stories that begin circulating about the 100th, where if somebody knew they were going to be assigned to the 100th, they'd rather jump out of the airplane over France than go to the 100th. Or a bomb group commander who I guess it was insinuated he might become the next bomb group commander of the 100th, and instead he did something else. Things like that began to circulate an awful lot at that same time. Is all that myth as well? Is all that just all the sort of stories that got started? Heather, you're chuckling. Give us a thought or two.
Well, I mean, I never even heard those stories. I mean, I've always, when I started at the museum 18 years ago, there was obviously a lot more of the original guys out there. And, I would just follow them along through the museum and sit and talk to, and they between themselves, it was more, I got more of the B-24 versus the B-17 rivalry stories more than anything. And so I'd actually never heard the extent of, everyone would always, kind of joke about the 100th. But one of the first questions I was asked was, what was the first plane, was taught by every single one I ever met was Memphis Belle was not the first one to fit or finish their 25 missions, and the wheels up story is wrong. It wasn't true. And then you get those few who would say it was true, but most would emphatically say it wasn't. I never heard any of those other stories till I read these letters and about he ran. I'd rather jump out over England, bail out over England than get shot down over France with part of the 100th. I never heard that. I think it was just, there was always the rivalry, and unfortunately, due to especially Black Week, those very, very high losses in Black Week for the 100th, that it just sort of became the stories, and the rumor mill, and, people being funny, that I have never, ever, ever read anything about any of that being true, ever. These letters were the first I ever heard of it. And they love to, tell me all the rumors and the jokes and the whatever, and I never heard it. So no, I don't believe any of that, but.
Well, I can tell you, Heather, that in all the pubs and bar rooms in England, the 100th bomb group was the most notorious.
Yes, yeah, oh yeah, that I believe.
Out of the entire 8th Air Force. And if any negative story arose, it would almost naturally be attributed to having happened either to or in the 100th bomb group. That was just our reputation. And we still have it to this day.
Well, that's why you guys are always so fun to hang out with. And your kids and grandkids are so fun to hang out with. There's a lot of personalities.
That played a big part in the selection of the 100th as being the focus for the series.
Yes, a lot of larger than life personalities. But I think it just is, like you just said, it's basically they just got attributed to those stories, or people were being funny. So let's say that with the 100th somebody bailed out. Nobody would have done that ever in a million years.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience, when a replacement crew would show up in the 100th bomb group, it was not unusual for them to have their chins on their chest.
Yeah.
And you'd say, what the heck's wrong with you? And they'd say, well, we've been assigned to the 100th. It's a death sentence.
Yeah. Yeah, Lucky's right. My dad came in right after Münster. When more than half the group was knocked out. He said, we were sure we were dead ducks. And one of his gunners went AWOL.
Oh, so see, it is true. See, I learned something new. I am always learning something new.
He got there and he said, this is a death sentence, and he took off. And I think what they did in those circumstances, they reassigned him to a ground job at a different group.
Yes, they did. I know they would get reassigned. I'm going to have to read more of our letters now about all of this.
But let me read something that Bennett says along these lines, because Bennett is one who chose to go to the 8th Air Force, and they tried to talk him out of going overseas and joining the 8th, because the 8th was considered the toughest of all the theaters in the air war by far. And he said, I got there and he said that although the losses in the 100th, and this is in his book, are high, they're by no means the highest in the 8th Air Force, which was my point earlier, and that is true. The Sentry bombers' losses are nearly always spectacular, however. We might run along for 4 months with low losses, which is true, especially in his squadron once he took over. But then one day we would lose half the group. What the 100th lacks in luck, it made up for in courage. The men of the Sentry have fighting hearts.
Interesting. I see Doug Doors had his hand up for a while. Doug, I think you're unmuted.
All right. One of the books, I couldn't find the source, but when the B-24s were converting over to the B-17s, B-24 groups tail markings were the circle with an O. And when they transitioned to B-17s, they were terrified that the O looked a lot like the D, and they wanted to change their tail letter and became a W.
And what was the shape?
Well, the shape would have been a square, I would assume, or it could have been a triangle if they went to the first division.
Yeah.
But they physically changed their tail letter from O to W.
Yeah.
The power of these sort of gossip rumor mills, it's amazing today in so many aspects of our society and culture with the internet and all that. And it's, according to Lucky, it was amazing in the early 1940s in the pub culture in England. All these young men, and we're talking young men, we're talking 20, 22, 24-year-olds, having a couple brews and telling a lot of stories.
Well, each time it was retold, it would get longer legs.
Listen, there's one more group commander I want to bring up, just out of the responsibility of being a little bit complete here. We can't cover every single one, but it's another man that, as I read about him, was very, very impressed. And he's the man that replaces Bennett as acting commander, and that's Colonel Thomas Jeffrey, who I know is also highly respected and also further developed and evolved the 100th into becoming one of the best of the bomb groups. I know, Lucky, that's after your time. But did you know Thomas Jeffrey in the reunions afterwards? Any thoughts on him, Lucky, or other panel members?
I never knew Jeffries until I met him at a reunion.
Yeah. And what sort of man?
I served under Chick Harding, not only during my tour in England, because he was the longest commander of the 100th that we had, but I also served under him when they moved the 8th Air Force back to the States. And he was my commanding officer here at Carswell Air Force Base in Texas. So I knew him socially as well as militarily, and liked him a lot.
There's go ahead. Lucky.
Yeah, Jim or Nancy or Heather, any comments on Thomas Jeffrey?
Yeah, Tom Jeffrey was, he came from the 390th. So that was one of the other three groups within the 13th Combat Wing. So he was like moving within the neighborhood, if you will. Very established leader there, very respected. And I would say the way I think of it, and this is just me talking, studying it historically, because by the time Jeffrey came along, my dad was a POW. But my understanding is that he finished what Bennett started. And in between was the famous Colonel Kelly. West Point had all the credentials, regular Army, didn't know squat about flying a mission and managed to get himself and his superb lead crew, including Bubbles Payne, shot down and killed in 1 week in late April. I think the mission date was April 28th.
On his first and only mission.
As first and only mission, it is just the most ridiculously sad story and waste of good men. It was, yeah, so Bennett obviously took over briefly, but that's when Jeffrey came in. And Jeffrey was phenomenal.
The theory behind the crash was that they'd made a pass on the target, which it was a no-ball, which means the V-2 German rockets on the French coast. They made a pass, and then they came back at the same altitude. And by this time, the German anti-aircraft batteries had zeroed in their altitude, and that's why they got shot down.
Exactly. It's almost makes you want to cry to say it out loud. That's exactly what happened.
With regard to Tom Jeffrey, I never met the man, but the beauty of YouTube is there are long interviews of these guys, and he has a long interview on YouTube. And just listening to him talk, you could tell he was a leader. Yeah. This man could lead men, and he was going places. He was all business. So he was the right man at the right time.
Right. I met him at reunions in the 90s.
Yeah.
Just remarkable guy.
Glenn, Brad had a question, but Brad, I unmuted you. I thought you might want to ask it yourself.
Lucky, good evening, and thank you again for joining us. It's always a pleasure and a real honor. Now, we're going to time travel you back to the war, knowing what you know now and what you've learned over the years. You're now the CEO of the Hundredth. What would you do differently?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, like
You are now the CEO of the Hundredth, and you're going back in time. You know what you know now. What would you do differently?
I'd probably resign. I'd say it's not for me.
Well, that gives me a chance to again emphasize something Mike made so clear to me. Mike Faley made so clear to me in my discussion with him yesterday, and that's exactly the position that Chick Harding was put in mid 1943. Shows up all those things about the history of the 100th that we've been talking about. Already had a few terrible missions. And a rather undisciplined group of men. The Buckies were incredibly brave and good plot flyers and so forth, but you know they liked their party atmosphere a bit, if you will. And all of a sudden, Chick Harding is there, and boy, it just overwhelms me to think about what he was thinking about at the time. And how difficult it must have been for him. And his answer was to lead from the front. His answer was to lead with his own bravery, from what I can see. And
and I think Bennett was the same. And I think Lucky can comment on this. But when you read the history of the group and you focus on the missions, if you look at the numbers, and this is all documented, of how many planes the group puts up, how many planes abort and go back for one reason or another, and then how many planes make it onto the continent and head to the target. There was a consistent problem within some groups where the abort rate was way too high, and pilots would come back reporting mechanical problems that didn't exist. I mean, there were any number of things. It was the challenge of the leader, in Bennett's view, to stop that. That was a very high priority for him. And his philosophy, when you read his book and you read what his approach was if, to your point, Glenn, if the men would not follow him as the leader, then he was in the wrong job. And because he chose this against all advice, people thought he was nuts to go over and volunteer for the 8th. He said, I was going to stick it out, and I was going to set the tone and the conditions under which men would follow me into battle. And I see March 8th, 1944 as the turning point for that. If you look at the losses in the week prior, March 3rd, March 4th, March 6th, many of the key men were lost, airmen were lost. And Bennett steps up with the few he's got left. And famously on March 8th, 1944, not one plane that takes off aborts and returns to base. They all follow him to the target. And the target, yet again, is Berlin.
Which brings me to the question I want to ask our other World War II veteran here. I'm asking Ed to unmute, and I'd like to get Ed's view of this. Ed, I hope I'm not being unfair by springing this on you, but leadership. I mean, that's what we've talked about over and over again here, and leadership at this bomber group commander level, very high level, right? You know, I've taught leadership for years in my career, but I've taught it to corporate executives, marketing executives, sales executives. You know, the worst thing that can happen is you don't get a promotion or a raise. You know, nobody dies from poor leadership in those contexts. But you men that have been in combat and had to be led by higher ups, what does it take? What do you look for in a combat leader that maybe is different than what a civilians would look for in a non-combat leadership situation? Ed, what sort of leadership did you have in your experience in flying?
I was fortunate. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, I was fortunate because the 48th Fighter Group had great leaders. And when I first got to the fighter group in September of 44, our current leader was being replaced, and a young man by the name of Stanley Latchley became our squadron commander, and he led by example. He didn't ask any pilot to do anything that he wouldn't do. And as a pilot, you respect that because you know that he's going through the same thing that you're going through. So I think leadership is probably the biggest thing that caused the 100th to have so many casualties, because there wasn't apparently there wasn't the real leadership for the pilots that they needed on those types of missions. I can't speak because I never flew a bomber mission, but I know that when I got ready to go on a mission and I looked at my squadron commander, I knew he was out there to get me there, do her job, and get me back. And that always happened.
And he'd do everything in his power to make that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have two other combat leaders here on the program, and that's Brad Washaba and Doug Dorr. You guys, obviously not World War II, but it's combat. Would you care to comment on combat leadership? Do we need to unmute you? I'll unmute Doug.
I'll unmute Brad.
Okay.
Well, I think a lot of what's been said remains true today, but I think decisiveness is key, especially when all the facts aren't known. You got to stick your neck out and have that intuitive process to know what might work and what might not. And it's really based upon building a foundation of trust. You have this trust in your leader, and it's built way before that first round is coming your way. it's in training, it's in everything that you do. You build that trust and camaraderie within the unit. And you can almost feel it and see it when you look in the eyes of a leader that has it. And it just instills confidence up and down the chain of command. And you're willing to try anything if that person says, this will work, let's do it. But it isn't something instant. You don't take a pill and have it. It's years of training and experience and being able to, as what you heard, lead from the front, take the same risks as people underneath you, and be willing to make those tough decisions when other people would be wringing their hands and looking for that 80% solution. You're willing to stick your neck out and make a decision when not all the facts are known. And that's, what I recall a good commander being in combat.
Doug, anything you'd like to add?
I agree with Brad regarding decisiveness and trust in in your leaders. Perfect example, Granny Amos in Grenada, not only flying the initial assault, but the night assault going into Grand Mall, and then the Grand Aunt's rescue of the students. Nothing known except we've got to get those students out. And Granny gave his famous F the brief, follow me. And aircraft assignments are made. They launched to Grand Aunt's, and literally like football coaches describing the next play. Granny, the Ranger commander, and the special ops people drawing the game plan that they're going to execute within 15 minutes on the ground. And everybody just knew that this was the way it was going to be. And the decisiveness that Granny and the others showed made it flawless execution of that. Nobody was lost. We had some damaged helicopters, but no students were lost. And the Rangers all made it out. And decisiveness is key.
Yeah. Thank you both for those comments. Thank you. Lucky, of course, please.
Glenn, just as a parting shot, in bomber formations, we could tell almost immediately when we had a good command pilot in the front seat of the leading bomber, because leadership in a bombing formation is one who is internally mindful of all of those behind him. And even a half a degree variation in course or altitude could spell the difference between the lives of those on the fringes of that formation. And that became so apparent so quickly when we were in the air and we were following a leader. So a good leader knew what was mindful constantly of all of those behind him.
Yeah, it's an aspect, I rewatched Masters of the Air over the Thanksgiving holiday with my in-laws who were in town, my wife's sister and brother-in-law. They had not seen it. And, when you rewatch it for the fifth time, you keep picking up things you hadn't seen before. And to think about those bomber streams being 25, 30 miles long and 10 miles wide, and the ability to lead a formation like that, how difficult it had to be. Well, listen.
That was one of the reasons why the Germans had 350, 400 fighters scattered and staggered down the entire chain waiting for them, because those bomber formations were so massive. The flak screen couldn't take care of them all, and the fighters were expected to do their duty. But I mean, all the way from the coast of France all the way into Germany, you had a staggered fighter defense force supported by the flak. And people wonder, well, why were so many bombers lost? Well, you got to look at what the hell they were up against. I mean, you were up against a 4 or 5 tiered wall of defense of men dedicated to protecting their country. But the thing about what was said before about leadership is that leadership, and I was in the Marines and the Army. I was in both branches, infantry, airborne, and I can tell, and reconnaissance. So I can tell you that leadership is about character. If you do not have the character to lead, then you should not be in a leadership position. You have to put other people before yourself.
And it's only, I imagine it's only magnified many times over in a combat situation, because people's lives are on the line, not promotions or raises. It's their lives that are on the line. So.
Yep.
Okay, it is the witching hour. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight and participating in the program. I especially want to thank our 2 World War II veterans. Cottrell, thank you for being here. Have a very safe trip to Bastogne, Ed.
Thank you.
Lucky.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. And Lucky, thank you so much. It was such an unexpected pleasure for you to tune in. I think about inviting you to all these things, Lucky, but I'm always a little worried about over asking. So I'm glad you volunteered this time.
Thank you for your consideration, Glenn.
And let me thank our panelist, Nancy, as always, and Jim, so very knowledgeable about the 100th. Colin, I don't know what we do without you, without your knowledge of the Luftwaffe. And Heather, so very nice to meet you and share this information you shared with us. I hope as we develop other programs, we can invite you back.
Wonderful. It was great. Thank you.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
And
Thank you
I
all.
learned a lot too.
John, thank
Yep.
you.
Of course.
And, we'll see you all next week. See you Monday for the Monday program and Thursday for B26s. Little different.
Thank you.
And happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yep,
Lucky.
same to you. Thank you.
Same, Lucky.
Thank you.
Before you pop off, there is the chat. I put the link to the survey if you would like to fill it out. We'll see you all on Monday night, and then next week also in person in Swickley. Have a great night, everybody.
Okay.